All right, so today I will be talking about CamRay and how camera arrays support remote collaboration on wall-size displays. This paper was done with Fleury, Wendy, Mackay, and Michel Beaudouin-Lafon at our lab Exitu, which is part of Université Paris-Saclay and INRIA. So let's start with what are wall-size displays good for. Well, they're good for many things, especially visualizing many data. So data sets that are large and dense. Let's look at an example. Here you can see two users working on brain scans. As you see, when they talk about the data, they use movement, they move from left to right, they use body gestures and postures, and they can collaborate in front of the space. Another collaborative task that wall-size displays are good for is data manipulation. Oops, sorry. So here you see two users sorting their related work for a Mackay publication. But we're wondering what happens when these two collaborators are not in the same room, so when they're not collocated. So how can we support remote collaboration in these spaces? Something similar as what you see there. That's okay. So two users working on the same task, each one with its own wall. The first thing we think of is video, because video is very good for remote collaboration. It's very good because it allows to show for understanding, give nonverbal cues, express attitudes, manage poses, forecast responses, etc. Having direct eye gaze allows for an alternative non-linguistic channel, and also the ability to see each other improves common ground in negotiation. Our work is inspired by Video Whiteboard, VideoDraw, and Clearboard because they mix these two spaces very well. So the space where we have the person, where people can do body gestures and use body language, basically the video, and their collaborative objects, the task space, into what Bill Buxton called the reference space. A particularly good work in the past is the tea room that integrates these two spaces very well, because here people can collaborate on objects, but at the same time they can understand the instructions, point, nod at each other, and see where remote people are looking at. So what are our challenges in our specific setup of wall-size displays? The main thing is that here people have the ability to move. So they might move from left to right to see more data, and back and forth to see data at a different scale. And how can we leverage their position to support remote communication, sorry. So to use video, to create a reference space, and to support movement. To answer this question, we performed a couple of observations. In a first study, we had a low fidelity prototype where we asked people to put together a slide presentation using our wall-size display. And the content was on the wall, but the users could see each other through iPads that helpers were holding on the side. Now we realized that people looked much more at the display, at the content on the big display than at each other on the Skype windows because they were not very conveniently placed on the side, so they had to turn their heads. This inspired us to put the cameras on the bezels of the wall-size display and to capture users from the front and to display this video on the remote side. So the front-facing camera, we send it to the left side of the display, and then we had a back camera, which we send to the right. We observed two main things. The first one is that DEICTIC gestures were better understood in the back-facing video on the right. I will show you an example, and I want you to focus on the user on the right. So as she moves and performs a gesture, the user on the left goes towards the back-facing video to interpret that gesture in context. The second thing we observed is that for conversation, they prefer to use the front-facing video. Here you can see them talking about the content, and they're looking at each other using the left video. With these two observations, we developed CamRay, a camera array for tile displays. So in our two wall-size displays in our campus, we installed 8 cameras in each, just above eye level, and we developed an infrastructure to send video across the two. So I will show you a diagram of how this works. Let's look at the wall-size display from the side, where you can see that we added 8 cameras between the 2 top monitors, and we connected them to a Raspberry Pi in the back each. And these 8 video feeds went through a switch to a computer that was able to select a specific feed using an infrared tracking system. And once it selected a feed, the one that is in front of the user, it was sent to a remote location using WebRTC. And in this second location, it was captured by a client which then forwards it to the next wall. Now, our tile displays are composed by many screens, each connected to a computer, so we need to send a stream to each computer. And we tested many ways to do this, but we observed that the best one was to send it to one client, and that one sends it to 3 clients, and those to 3 clients, and so on and so forth. So this tree structure allows for maximal performance. Now, although the videos are running on each monitor, we select one at a time, and we can move it, simulating, giving the illusion that we have only one video on the wall. Now, how to capture users using this infrastructure? Well, we're going to use the front camera that the user is in, and as they move, we switch the camera. And how are we going to present video? Since we have such a big place to present video, we could do it anywhere. But because we want to preserve mutual eye contact, what we realize is that we have to put the video very close to the camera, just below, so that when a user looks at the video, they're also looking at the camera, giving the impression of direct eye contact. Now, the 2 things that we want to support are DEICTIC gestures and conversation. As you recall from our observation, DEICTIC gestures were better understood with a back-facing video, where they could interpret instructions in context. And for conversation, they were using the front-facing video, where they could see each other's faces, as face-to-face conversation benefits from this. So we developed 2 techniques where we leverage the position of the remote and the local user. When we leverage the position of the remote user, we call this follow remote. Here, the user on the left is captured by a camera, and now pay attention when he moves towards the right, the video in the remote location also moves, because it follows the remote user. Now, when the local user moves on the right, his video stays where it is. Notice how here the DEICTIC instructions can be well understood because the video is placed in context of the content. Now let's look at a real example. Here I'm going to show you first one wall-size display. As you can see, there is one user on this side, another one on the other, and he moves, but the video stays still because it's following the remote user. And when the remote user moves, the video moves with him. Let's look at the same video, but with a 2 wall-size display. I want you to focus on the blue squares. And as the left user moves, his video on the remote side moves. And conversely, when the right user moves, the video on the left moves, because they always follow the remote user. The other thing we did was to leverage the position of the local user. Here, again, we use the front camera to capture the user's faces. But now we display the video with respect to the position of the user on the right. Now pay attention as how the user moves, the video didn't move. And now when the right user moves, the video in front of him follows his location, because the video always follows local. Again, let's look at a real example. When these 2 users are collaborating, as one moves, the video follows his location. And from the 2 wall-size displays, we can see that as the left user moves, focus on the squares, the video accompanies his movement. The same for the right user. So, a small recap. From our observations, we developed 2 techniques, for a local and for a remote. But as we observed that the DEICTIC instructions were very important, we wondered whether follow remote could support the DEICTIC gestures. So for this, we conducted an experiment. It is a 3x2 within participant design with 2 primary factors, the video and the layout, which I will get into it in a second. And we had participants have roles, the instructor and the performer. Let's look at the task first. So in this task that is already in the literature, the users have to pick red discs and drop them into correct containers. To do this, the containers and the discs have letters which belong to a category, and when a disc is in a container that doesn't have the same letter, it's red. So here you see that the Ks are well classified and the X are not. So the user has to pick the red discs and drop them in containers that contain green discs with the same letter. Here it's X. Now, as I told you, we had the users have 2 roles, an instructor and a performer. Here, the user that you see in front of you is the performer, and the remote user is the instructor. Now, the instructor sees the letters, so he's telling the performer how to move the discs. And the performer is the only one that has the ability to move discs. In this way, we force collaboration. Now, our factors are, the first one, video. As we know, follow remote, follow local, but we use a baseline condition that we call side-by-side, where we capture and display users from the side of the room. So basically, it's like bringing your own laptop into the room and running Skype. And we put those on the side, not on the display. And we had two difficulties, medium and hard. And for this, let's imagine that we're trying to classify the red disk in the red container. A medium layer will have a solution at this distance, and a hard layer will have solutions at that distance. So a little bit further away, and they had to search for these containers for a little bit longer. So now let's look at the results. First result is performance. So we measure time, as you can see here, for the 3 video conditions, and follow remote was statistically faster. It's an increase of 9.6% with respect to follow local and 8.2% with side-by-side. And we saw no interaction effect with the difficulty factor. Now, we were wondering why this happened. We did a kinematic analysis. I'm going to show you now real footage from our experiment. The first thing that we realized is that performers follow the instructor with their cursor. So here, focus on the right on the instructor. As he moves, the performer follows him with the red disk that he picked. Let's look at the same, but with a diagram now. We're looking at the 2 wall size displays from the top, and we're going to plot movement towards the right in time. So the performer cursor leaves a certain trace, and the instructor position leaves another trace. If we overlap them, they overlap very closely. So they're following each other, much more than in follow local or side-by-side. And if we run a statistical analysis on this difference, which you see plotted on the y-axis, we see that it's significant. The second thing we observe is that performers follow the instructors with their gaze. Now focus on the instructor on the left. As he moves his gaze upwards and leftwards, and then upwards again, the performer is following with the red disk that he has picked up. Again, let's look at a diagram. So in this same session, you see here the 2 wall size displays from the top. We plot towards the right movement in time, and you see the trace of the performer cursor and of the gaze of the instructor. If we overlap those, they follow each other very closely, much better than in follow local or side-by-side. And again, the statistical analysis of this difference yields significant results. But notice how the difference with side-by-side is much larger. This is because users have to look to the left to see their remote partners, so 90 degrees. Last thing we did was a conversational analysis. So analyzing the video and audio, we extracted the DEICTIC instructions that the instructors use. We had several categories relative to the video, so something like to the video, on the video to the right, purely DEICTIC, such as here or there, and relative to their own position, so where I am to the left. We saw that in follow remote, participants used many, many more DEICTIC instructions. And these instructions were well understood, better than in the other cases, because in follow remote, statistically there were fewer errors by the performers. Also, the instructors had to use fewer words to provide instructions. Now, when we asked our users what did they use the video for in follow remote, they said that the video was more useful than in other conditions. They looked it more than in other conditions. And the instructors said that their partners paid more attention to them, and the performers said that they understood their partner's instruction better. Now, if we look at their preference, the vast majority of performers prefer follow remote, which was expected, but we were surprised to see that almost half of the instructors prefer follow local. Now, we realized in our questionnaires that for follow remote, performers use the video to know in which column or even row they had to drop an object, but the instructors in follow local use the video to know if the partner was focusing on the same task, to get gaze direction and gestures, and to confer verbal instructions. So basically, they were checking for their partner's understanding. To summarize our results, in follow remote, we observed increased performance for this data manipulation task in time because performers could follow the instructors much more closely, and it allowed for using more DEICTIC gestures and to understand them better. And to use, instructors use less words to perform these instructions. So why this happened? Well, we have to look at the cost of communication in mediated communication. The cost of grounding in mediated communication, from Clark. So Clark defines several costs, and we think that follow remote reduces mainly 3 of them. The cost of formulation, because formulating utterances is easier for the instructors, as we observe, and also understanding is better, it's easier for the performers because they perform fewer errors, sorry. And the cost of display is also lower because for the instructors it's easier to point, nod, and present objects. So what does this mean for design? Well, first of all, that camera arrays can support collaboration, remote collaboration, and for remote better supports the DEICTIC instructions because we're creating Baxton's reference space. We think that our users should be able to choose their video behavior according to the task at hand. For future work, we want to explore the role of follow local, which we didn't do so far, but it's better for face-to-face conversation where people have to use facial and body gestures. We want to combine follow local and follow remote in two different ways. One, to create asymmetric setups, so each side runs a different mode, or to let the user switch and adapt to the task that they're doing. Also, we want to see how CamRay can support remote collaboration when there are more than 2 users and more than 2 locations. So with that, I conclude my talk. Thank you for your attention, and I will be taking your questions.
So surely there are some good questions, please. Excellent, thank you.
Hi, I'm Carla from INRIA.
Yep.
Well, given that you say that in the future work you would like to see what happens when you have more than 2 locations,
Yep.
do you already have any sort of intuitions of how follow remote, for example, would support that?
Well, having more than 2 locations means having more than 2 users for sure. So now we need more ways, so we need to display more video in each side for each remote user. And follow local means that the video is always in front of you, so you would have to choose which video or display 2 at the same time. So follow remote, it's a little bit more adapted because the videos run independent of the local users. So basically, because they follow the location of the remote user, you can have them naturally be displayed and move on the wall. Whereas follow local, you would have to either choose a feed or have both 3, 4, 5, 6 at the same time. Yeah. So if you're looking for a postdoc, a PhD, or visiting positions, we're offering those in our lab. And also I'm finishing my PhD this year, so feel free to contact me if you have interesting postdoc positions.